So I'm I'm Jesse. I'm with my friend Tovia, and we went to college together. And Tovia, now you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Actually, first, why don't you say a little bit more about the project?
Sure.
Yeah.
So the project is called TheRealHumanChallenge. As opposed to other challenges which require a simple action or a donation of money, which are good in and of themselves, this might be a bit more difficult both from an emotional standpoint as well as an intellectual standpoint, in that it requires at least two people to find something that they disagree on and to invite one another to a conversation about it. And the conversation would be ideally recorded either through a video or some audio recording as well, and that conversation would be shared on Facebook, and then someone else would be tagged with the hashtag TheRealHumanChallenge to consider the challenge for themselves. It's about promoting civil discourse on either hot button issues or points of disagreement and contention. It's an attempt to model and to promote nuanced civil discourse in ways that maybe we see are lacking today. So that would be the agenda and the goal of the Real Human Challenge.
Yeah. So now I think maybe introduce yourself again, and then I'll go.
Sure. So I am Jesse Shore, and I'm the assistant rabbi at Shari Shemayim, which is a synagogue in Toronto, Ontario.
My name is Tovia Moldwin, and I am a PhD student in computational neuroscience at the Hebrew University. All opinions expressed here are my own and not the opinions of Hebrew University or my PhD program, just to make that clear.
Okay, it's good. So with that disclaimer, I guess we can pick up from where we had our last disagreement, which was, I think, about whether forums should be monitored and there should be rules of decorum and how they ought to be implemented. So is that an appropriate way to express what we were disagreeing on?
Yeah, I think so. Should I start with my position?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So in general, I have some experience with moderating various kinds of discussion groups, online forums, and I think that the question of moderating discussion and debate in these forums is sort of a microcosm of the way that we want political discourse to look like. So I think that it's sort of important to look at these as case studies and sort of talk about it. So the first time I sort of got involved with this was when I was editor-in-chief of a newspaper. It was called The Beacon, back when I was a student at Yeshiva University, and it was really a forum for people to kind of write whatever they wanted, and I was the editor-in-chief. And the goal was that Yeshiva University was kind of a conservative-leaning place. Politically, it was a religious place, but we really wanted to have an opportunity for everyone to say what they wanted. So my role as an editor was mainly to accept pieces, writing, essays, stories, poems, from whoever wrote it, and really to publish everything. I might edit for grammar, and also if there was something that I thought was really, really, really not fit to be published, I wouldn't publish it, but otherwise pretty much everything we put up on the website. And so that was sort of one experience that there were many things over that period that generated controversy within the community, but in general, I thought that the controversy was a positive thing, which I think is sort of the core of the way that I think about these things. That I view discussion and debate, even vigorous debate about contentious topics, as something which has the potential to be very productive. And I believe in adversarial process producing something positive. And now I administer several, or mainly one Facebook group where we talk about politics, but political ideas. So we don't talk about specific politicians. We don't talk about Trump. We talk about things like healthcare and minimum wage and things like that. And recently I decided to impose some rules on the group where I was very strident against people using sort of ad hominem attacks, and I also put some other guidelines in terms of the way that I thought that a productive discussion should unfold. And some of the things which I think are important, in addition to not having ad hominem attacks and things of that nature, is that I think that it's very important that people clarify the terms that they use when asked, and that people don't sort of push other people away or do things that aren't actually responding to an argument, but instead of sort of saying, oh, if you had read this book, or if you had taken this course that I had taken, then you would understand that you're wrong. I'm opposed to that sort of tactic in a debate, because I think that instead of people communicating with each other and educating each other, you're just sort of using another person's lack of knowledge or lack of background to push them away. And so I think that it's kind of critical that people see discourse, even about contentious issues, as a process, as a collaborative process where people can educate each other, even people who have different opinions, and through the process of discussing, everyone can sort of come to a conclusion that they might not have otherwise come to because they have input from other people. So yes, that's my view, and then now Jesse can...
Sure. I mean, one of the things I'd like to know more about is really what constitutes something that's really, really, really not fit to be published. And I think that that's where we're kind of struggling on how to draw the line, because you're saying it's not good to push someone away, which assumes that insults carry weight where they push people away from being engaged in a conversation. Whereas an insult could also mean that someone is emotionally invested and someone is showing that they're emotionally invested in the conversation at hand. It could imply a lot of things other than, simply, I'm smarter than you. And if it really is just an insult, then there really is no conversation to be had. I mean, I think you and I would both agree that just, a string of explicatives and insults, is not really productive. But if there is an insult or something that can be perceived as an insult, or even an outright insult that is couched within some rational thought, then there's something important to be addressed here. And if someone is kicked off the thread, that could isolate a potential population that might learn from a certain type of discourse, or might even have to contribute something even with those insults. And in a way, it's isolating the other population that kind of has this perfect Socratic method that's very much isolated from the rest of our brains. I think one of the languages you said is, if you even smell something that sounds like an insult. You're the PhD in neuroscience, so you can correct me on this, is connected to primitive parts of our brain, whereas the later evolved parts of our brain are less emotionally connected. So it validates my point, where the emotional drive to make a protective barrier, where this pristine Socratic method takes place, is itself a valid reaction. But if that reaction is allowed to rule the day, then what we've effectively done is curated our discourse to minds that are very similar, and to minds that tend to not evoke as much emotion for some topics than for others. Because that's the real challenge. It's feeling those emotions, even making insults, and being able to continue the conversation. Even saying something that you might a couple days later regret. I might endorse an opinion, and then I might endorse an opposite opinion. And to be able to struggle with that represents a kind of openness that I think is valuable. I think we can all agree on some, very clear, obvious boundaries where someone is just trolling and just cursing and insulting. Then the insult, in a way, loses its power, because the less effective that curse or swear word or insult is. If someone insults people all the time, no one really can take them seriously, or as seriously as someone who maybe is calm most of the time, but there's a time where they actually swear, or there's a time where they actually insult. That's a key to some significant part of who they are for the conversation to actually continue, I would hope.
Mm-hmm. Well, since you made a neuroscience reference to a neuroscientist, I'll make a Talmud reference to a rabbi. So one of the sort of salient stories in the Talmud about this topic is a story of two rabbis in the Talmud, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. For listeners who aren't familiar, Rabbi Yochanan was a well-known sage. And Reish Lakish, originally when he started out, he was a bandit, a highwayman. According to some versions, he was a gladiator. There's a story which I won't get into now, but basically Rabbi Yochanan took Reish Lakish under his wing, and Rabbi Yochanan started teaching Reish Lakish the Torah. He started teaching him religion, and eventually Reish Lakish became Rabbi Yochanan's equal, and they were study partners for a very long time. And all over the Talmud, you see them debate about pretty much any topic you can think of. Then the Talmud has a story that one day they were discussing something that had to do with the ritual purity of knives, or some sort of something like that. And at one point, Reish Lakish expressed an opinion, and Rabbi Yochanan said his opinion. And then Rabbi Yochanan said, "You know what? I'll let the bandit, have the sort of he has the right answer on knives because they're the tools of his trade, or something of that effect." And so it reminded Reish Lakish of his past sort of life as a criminal, and something that he probably didn't want to be associated with anymore. So Reish Lakish took offense at this, and he became depressed and eventually died. And Rabbi Yochanan, after Reish Lakish died, he became miserable. He was searching for another study partner, but couldn't find anyone like Reish Lakish, and so Rabbi Yochanan eventually also kind of went crazy because of this incident. So I think this is sort of an instance of, you have two people who argued about pretty much everything, but once it became personal, all of a sudden it became toxic. And once sort of an abstract debate leaves the realm of the intellectual and becomes personal, it starts actually hurting people emotionally. And I don't think that's productive for anyone or anything. I think that all of Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish's debates and the rest of the Talmud were fantastic, and then this one thing happened, and it ruined it for everyone. So to me, I see that as sort of a model for the personal insults and attacks can do in an intellectual forum.
Right. So I think that story might be a difficult story to make a paradigm with, for two reasons. The first one is that Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish had a much more intimate interface with each other than people on online forums do. You mentioned that they argued all of their lives, and Rabbi Yochanan was responsible. He was the person responsible for being Mekarev to Reish Lakish. He, in a way, was responsible for his change of lifestyle. He knew his history, and they had a close intimacy with each other. And so in that sense, I agree very much that a close friendship and a close intimacy, when you use a word which, in the context of an online forum would seem kind of almost sarcastic, that could be very hurtful. And so words and the impact of our words indeed are relative. In that case, it really depends on what you want your online forum to be. If you're curating it to be a group of people who go through life experiences together, who see each other face to face, who help each other, who marry each other's, relatives, then I can understand how even a light insult would be hurtful. Perhaps even a harsher insult wouldn't be hurtful because it's so ridiculous. Two very close brothers may curse themselves out, and then they may hug each other and cry after seeing each other. I actually know a relationship where people share intimacy that way, where they actually talk about how they hate each other, and while they do that, they haven't seen each other for a long time, they hug and they cry. So a very light insult, by contrast, might carry much more weight. But in the context of online forums and trying to model good dialogue, I think part of it is actually allowing yourself to be emotionally hurt, then gaining some perspective, and if the person is willing to continue, if both are willing to continue, to me, that's where the ideal dialogue comes from, not from beginning at the top of the mountain, right, where at the bottom is all of this personal history together. So that's the first thing that I would say is relevant in considering that example. Second thing that I think is relevant in considering the Yochanan Reish Lakish example as a paradigm for dialogue is, the rest of Chazal, it would be wonderful if the Shach listened to that when he was disputing the Taz, or if other statements in the Gemara where Hashem save us from your opinion, which is...
Sorry, so just, are all of our listeners Jewish? Do we want to translate some of this
so you know what? There's a Facebook group called God Save Us from Your Opinion, which is actually a phrase in the Talmud, and that's clearly an insult. There are many instances where Chazal praise one another, but they do it in a way that contrasts their attributes with others.
Sorry, who are Chazal?
Chazal are they are the rabbis of the Talmud in rabbinic literature, and there are a myriad of playful and perhaps more serious insults that I'm aware of. And so I think that ideally, I agree, there would be no explicatives and deliberate jabs at someone, at ad hominems, but an ad hominem is a very trivial non sequitur to someone's argument or responding to someone's argument. But in the context of a larger dialogue, there's some valuable information to be had from those ad hominems, both for the person who's using them, as well as for the person who is, at the butt of those jokes or of those insults. So it really depends on your assessment of how we use our language. If you think that you're trying to model something for the general society, then starting from the very top, where if you and I don't know each other and I use an insult, that presumes so much weight to words that culturally we just don't have. If you look at daytime television, if you listen to colloquial discussions, you have very sharp insults used amongst people who are friendly and as well as people who don't know each other. So I think that is a bit too ambitious to use that model of Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish as a paradigm.
Okay, so there's another aspect here too, which is beyond sort of generalizing from this one story or from our intuitions. There's also kind of the empirical question of what kind of forums exist online that are moderated and not moderated, and sort of what are the quality of those forums. And so in my experience, from what I've seen, forums that are moderated just tend to be high quality. And it's true, or more high quality than those that aren't moderated. It's true that you do have different levels of discourse in television and different media, but also those levels of discourse also have different levels of quality. I think that too, an educated observer, an educated objective observer, you can sort of rank different websites and forums and things like that by the quality of discussion that goes on. And I don't think that that's an especially controversial statement.
Maybe it might be. What's an educated objective observer?
That's a tough question.
That would be very helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. So on the one hand, it's a difficult question to answer, but on the other hand, you can't not answer the question, because I think that we do sort of have to have some kind of sense in society of what kind of forums are productive and positive, and what forums are cesspools. There are forums that just are really degenerate and just 100% people hurling insults at each other. And then there are things like, I think Wikipedia might be a very good example. So I'm not so involved in like the discussion pages on Wikipedia, but Wikipedia and also as a programmer, so sites like Stack Overflow, which have technical information, very, very heavily regulated websites, very strict rules, but these are places that people go to get authoritative information, because the information there is so tightly controlled and curated through an adversarial process that people actually think that these are very, very reliable sources of information. I mean, it used to be the case that people would say...
Can you explain what an adversarial process is?
So by adversarial process, I mean that you have people with different opinions who disagree with each other. and they make that disagreement clear. But you also have usually some sort of moderator that makes a decision that the adversarial process is going according to the way that it's supposed to work and produce something productive, as opposed to just degenerating into people hurling insults. And that is a fine line. But again, I think that if you just look at the kind of policies that these very high quality sites have, you see that that they tend to have strict policies and also very high quality content.
Wow. So first I thought that you had a more optimistic view of how to spread civil discourse, and now I think that I am the one that has the more optimistic view, because it seems that your view is that anywhere where there are insults is a place more likely than not to degenerate into uncivil discourse and just deliberately hurting one another. That might be true insofar as it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. But if people have resilience and a sense of self-worth, there's actually a friend of mine on Facebook posted that someone said that he doesn't know much about Judaism. They should take a course that he took on Judaism, and he has a couple books that he could reference. And this friend of mine has smicha from YU, and he's a Jewish educator. He's given shiurim, and he's a very bright individual, very committed to Judaism, Rabbinic Judaism in particular, identifies as Orthodox. And I really admire him. And he posted this quote, and everybody was laughing at the quote of how silly it was. But part of me wonders, maybe the problem isn't only speaking aggressively or throwing insults, because I think that we both agree that there is some threshold. We maybe disagree on where that is, but there is some threshold where something does in fact degenerate into uncivil discourse. But I also think that the problem in that case is on the other extreme, where there is a cynicism and a sensitivity that comes with that cynicism, where when people invest aggressive emotion into an adversarial process, it is tainted with original sin, so to speak. I just don't think that has to be the case. That I do think that there is a deep optimism, even when there's emotional hurt, or even when there's a risk of emotional hurt. And it does seem to me that the more one's emotions are involved, then the more fulfilling and meaningful a conversation can become. Yeah, I think that kind of characterizes where we might disagree. So what I'll do is, because it's I have to get ready for Shabbat, is you'll have the last word, because this is me asking you to dialogue with me. So I'm very grateful for your time. You can take us out with your thoughts.
Yeah, sure. So I think that you characterized it well, and I thank you for your time also. I think that this has been productive. This question, like many other questions, ultimately does come down to a question of thresholds, and it's not a binary question of yes or no. It's a question of where you draw the line. And I think that it is legitimate for people to want to have different kinds of communities and forums that have different thresholds for the level of emotion that's involved in debate. And so I wouldn't suggest that everyone should use my particular threshold for everything. But I do think that there is a lot of value in sort of enforcing norms of a sterile debate where people are only focusing on the issues and not feeling personally attacked. And I think that as a society, that is something that we could use more of in political discourse, even if it's not universal.
Okay. Thank you for recording this. I'm very grateful.
Yeah, sure thing.
Have a good Shabbos.
You too.
Okay.